I want us to turn to immigration because in Europe, immigration is a big thing over the past couple of years. We had a lot of refugees coming up from the Middle East,
Mhm.
and so I know there are research regarding how immigration might play in the whole issue of experiences in the classroom. Are
Mhm.
there any data that you're aware of or research that you can speak on regarding how immigration influence school experiences? And if so, are there differences again regarding whether it's a person from an indigenous background, from a Black background, from an Asian or Middle Eastern background?
Right. So the research that I'm most familiar with is again in the US setting in relation to Latinx populations. And I guess a big barrier or challenge that these populations face, and it would be similar for European populations, is that of language. And so if individuals don't speak English or speak English with an accent, there's
Or here it would be German, so they don't
oh,
speak
sorry, don't
German.
speak German or
Mhm.
speak German with an accent, then there's an automatic assumption that they're lacking in intelligence, right? So again, these racist assumptions about individuals who probably speak three different languages aside from the majority culture language. And because they are having trouble with the majority culture language or speak that language with an accent, there's assumptions made about who they are and what their abilities are. And I know, especially in Europe, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of xenophobia in relation to people coming from these Muslim majority countries, and this idea and the stereotypes that exist about Muslim populations, and how they might be changing the values of the European school system. So, preoccupation with Muslim cultures being, conservative as compared to compared to European countries and things like that. And so those cultural differences definitely, the cultural differences and the language differences put immigrant populations at risk of being, again, experiencing those similar types of exclusion and stereotypes that, African American and Black Canadian populations face in North America. And so similarly, my assessment would be the same, which is that, first of all, teachers, schools, administrators have to recognize that, a student who is just learning English, or a student whose parents or just learning German, or whose parents don't speak German, but the child does, recognize that that is not a sign of a lack of intelligence or a lack of awareness. It's just a language barrier. And so oftentimes language barriers can be fixed by language learning classes. But it's also really important for students to as soon as they do have a handle on the majority cultural language, it's important for those students to then be placed in mainstream classrooms, because oftentimes their language skills can be impaired by not having the chance to practice day-to-day language with the people who speak the majority language culture, the people who speak the majority language. So ensuring that you don't just use the second language learning classes as a quick fix where you segregate students from the mainstream and then don't reintegrate them into mainstream classrooms, because then that will impede their long-term success. In addition, these students, especially students with immigration histories, they're dealing with trauma, especially based on the trajectory for refugees in particular. They're dealing with a lot of trauma in relation to those immigration experiences. And so schools need to have embedded in that space type supports that are culturally responsive, with people who experts who are from these cultures or who speak these languages, to support the students in school, because the easiest way to get to these families is through the school system. So ensuring that there's specific supports for these families to help them manage that transition, because the transition, the trauma includes the specific history that they're dealing with from the countries that they're coming from, for people who are refugees, as an example, but then also the potential trauma of having to adjust to this new country and facing potential racism and exclusion in these spaces. So it's good for schools to have these resources in place to support families in the school system in particular. So again, the biggest challenges that these populations face are the language challenges, and then adjustment issues based on trauma through the immigration experience, and then potential trauma in adjusting to the majority culture.